Imagine finding out after 4 decades that your parents were murdered when you were a child and you've been considered a missing person.
That is the reality of a woman who was dropped off at an Arizona church as a baby, known as Baby Holly. Tonight, she opens up to Fox 10 investigator Justin Lum about her family's cold case, Odyssey, linked to a religious group.
In the state of Texas, there are over 20,000 unsolved murders.
Within the dense green forest of a rural area in Houston, Texas, authorities discovered the bodies of a young man and woman. The man was left bound and beaten, and the woman had been strangled.
In 1981, 2 deceased individuals were discovered in the wooded area in Houston, Texas. Their identities could not be determined at that time. What law enforcement did know is that they were likely murdered.
How do you describe this case?
Hopeful, but also very frustrating.
Referred to as John and Jane Doe's, sometimes called Romeo and Juliet, the double murder case went cold for 40 years. But in 2021, the evolution of forensic genetic genealogy led to the identification of 21-year-old Dean and 17-year-old Tina Klaus, a married couple who once lived in Florida. They also had a baby girl less than a year old named Holly Marie, but she was nowhere to be found at the scene of the crime. Sergeant Rachel Kading works in the Cold Case and Missing Persons Unit for the Texas Attorney General's Office. Through her investigation into the Klaus murders, she learned Dean and Tina joined a nomadic religious group known as Christ Family in October of 1980. Christ Family members gave up worldly possessions, wore white robes, walked barefoot, did not eat meat, and frequented the Arizona-California border, mainly staying in Yuma or Blythe. The group also separated men and women.
So not only were they nomadic, lived outside, traveled around, they also viewed, well, some would say that they viewed that relationship with the child as also a conflicting relationship.
Which leads us back to baby Holly. This is where Holly's life changed, the Seventh-day Adventist Church in Yuma, Arizona. A pastor with the prayer had no idea what was about to happen next.
I remember looking down the hallway, looking through the glass window in the door and seeing these 2 ladies dressed in white. That would seem unusual to the average person, but having been a pastor, I had seen these ladies around. I'd met them before. I didn't know anyone particular. They just all looked the same, you know. It was kind of like a uniform, but I knew that they were needing some kind of help.
Former pastor Philip McGoldrick took that baby girl in. Here are the documents relinquishing parenthood, signed by Tina and Dean Klaus.
The whole impression was of a mother trying to give her child a safe place to live and possibly come back and get the child later.
That was November 8th, 1980, just a couple months before the Klauses were found murdered.
My wife and I had been praying for a baby, so maybe God was answering our prayer in a very surprising way.
My dad is my hero, for one, the real hero of the story.
And this is Holly Marie now, more than 40 years later, a mother of 5 and a grandmother living in Oklahoma. Holly was working her shift at a restaurant when she learned what happened to her biological parents.
Didn't really think much of them until the investigators came knocking on my door.
Charles McHugh was the leader of Christ Family, known as Lightning Amen. He served time in a California prison for a drug conviction and was also found guilty of child molestation. He died in 2010 at the age of 73. Cult experts I've spoken to about Christ Family say Amen was pathological.
I started to realize this was a cult, not a religious group.
Do you think a member of the Christ Family had something to do with the murders?
I don't believe that anybody I've spoken to has anything to do with the murders, but I cannot say that a member of Christ Family is not responsible.
Sergeant Kading says if a member was responsible, it would be a fringe member. Thousands of people joined and left the group over time. She has not identified anyone who specifically remembers Dean, Tina, or Holly.
I really think that they were trying to leave the group because they were found together, not separated. You know, the men and women are separated in this cult. They were found together. They were not found with their white robes. They were found with normal clothes. So I do believe that in their travels of leading this cult is how they got murdered.
But investigators say 2 witnesses signed the document when Tina surrendered Holly at the Yuma church, Coral Mariano and Rosemary Garcia. Both women have passed away. Sergeant Katie believes Rosemary Garcia is a significant witness, even though she's no longer alive. Katie says she has 3 daughters who traveled with the Christ family group. Investigators want to know what happened after Tina gave up Holly and how long was she with Rosemary before ultimately reuniting with her husband. Rosemary's daughters are named Joyce, Janice, and Jill, known as the 3 J's. They would be young adults or teens in 1980. They are not suspects in the murders, but could they help fill gaps in the timeline, the newest leads in the mystery murders? What would it mean for you and your team to identify a suspect?
Everything. I mean, that's why we do this job. We do this job so that we can bring closure to families, and that's obviously always the goal. We want to find out what happened and what the truth is. The complete truth, which means justice for Dean and Tina Klaus, and closure for Holly Marie as she begins a new chapter of her life while reuniting with biological family members through her journey.
Just had all these mixed emotions of this grief for what happened to my parents and learning that, and then this joy of wow, there's this family that you know has been praying for me to be found. And
I'm Justin Lum for Fox 10 Investigates.
Holly Marie has written a book titled Finding Baby Holly, telling her life story. She also encourages people to donate to Genealogy for Justice, a nonprofit dedicated to solving cold cases across the country. And if you have any tips on the Klaus murders, we have information on where to send them on fox10phoenix.com.